to the Steel City Sports Podcast. This is episode 4, and typically for podcasts, we jump around from segment to segment, but today we have just one really long segment, and that is ranking every NFL head coach. This was a hard list to make. I feel like this list was harder to make than even ranking like some players, just because I feel like head coach really just comes down to what do you value in a coach. So I have broken it down into 6 different tiers. We're going to go through it one by one. So grab your popcorn. This is going to be a long format video. I'm going to try to make it quick, but if you know anything about me, you know I can ramble. So this is mainly based on this year. I'll take into account some past things, but mainly we're ranking this based off of 2023. Okay, so starting at 32, and this category, this tier is called, these people shouldn't have a job next year. That is this group of people. 32 is Chris Tabor, the interim head coach for the Carolina Panthers. Literally, I know nothing about this guy. I don't even know what he looks like. I don't know if he's an offense or a defensive mind. I don't know. I literally know nothing about him. He's just an interim head coach. He's a placeholder until Carolina gets to the offseason where they're going to find their next head coach. So Chris Tabor, he's in last place because I literally know nothing about him. 31, this shouldn't shock anyone if you're a longtime listener of the show, is Brandon Staley. And I made a video back, what was it, a week or two ago? I can't remember how long it's been, but I basically said if Brandon Staley wasn't fired, that I wasn't going to talk about the Chargers for the rest of the year. And that's why you haven't seen me do any Charger videos since. And I hate to even talk about him here, but he's a head coach right now. I got to rank him, and I would put him as the 31st NFL head coach. Brandon Staley is completely incompetent. There's no redeeming qualities to Brandon Staley. Has completely trashed this team. I mean, you just look at the Chargers team on paper. They have arguably a top 5 roster in the entire NFL. Look at what Khalil Mack is doing this year. 15 sacks. I think he actually has more now. Completely wasted the talent. There's so much talent on this Chargers team, and for them to have that putrid record is just a reflection on how awful the head coach is. He's a complete disgrace. There's nothing redeeming about Brandon Staley. He should not have a job next year. 30 is Jonathan Gannon from the Cardinals. Now, obviously, they're not going to fire him next year because they just hired him, and you can kind of use the built-in excuse that, hey, we didn't have our starting quarterback. Now, I could be a little low on Gannon, but I just never liked this hire from the start. Specifically, being an offensive-minded person myself, I think in today's NFL, and you're probably going to hear me talk about this a lot during the list, is in today's NFL, I think you automatically just set yourself up for disadvantage when you hire a defensive-minded head coach because all of the roles are slanted to favor the offense in today's NFL. And you look at the past however many coaches doing the Super Bowl, take Belichick out because he had the best quarterback ever. The last couple, coaches to win the Super Bowl were all offensive-minded. Andy Reid, Bruce Arians, I'm kind of blanking right now, but you guys know what I mean. So Jonathan Gannon, I never liked the hire, especially with a young dynamic quarterback. I'd like a more offensive-minded guy there. I think Jonathan Gannon's kind of a goofball. We all clowned on him in the offseason with that, you got that fire in your gut nonsense. So he won't be fired. He's probably the one guy in this tier that actually will keep his job, but I just don't even agree with them hiring him in the first place. 29, Dennis Allen from the Saints. He's bad, really, really bad. And I didn't get this hire at all. Again, this is another one that didn't really make sense to me, but I get it. They were kind of promoting from within, and their defense had a lot of success in like the late 10s, like back in like 2018, 2019, 2020. The Saints had a really nice, dominant defense. So you give him the nod here after Peyton leaves, and it's been a complete and utter disaster ever since he's taken over the Saints. And the Saints, you can't tell me that they don't have talent on this team. They definitely have talent, especially at key positions. They have talent on this roster, and they've been a fledgling disaster ever since Dennis Allen has taken over. So I don't think he'll be the head coach next year. 28, we have Antonio Pierce from the Raiders. This is a weird one because I actually think Antonio Pierce is really good, and I think the Raiders actually do a better job at finding interim head coaches than they do real head coaches, which is kind of crazy because I think they actually should have just kept Rich Bisaccia as their head coach. He was their interim guy after Gruden left, and they made the playoffs with him. And then this year, after you fired Josh McDaniels, they were instantly better under Antonio Pierce. So I think he's actually obviously a big improvement over McDaniels, but again, I just don't think he'll have a job next year because he's an interim, and very, very rarely interim head coaches stay on as the actual full-time head coach the next season. 27, Matt Eberflus from the Chicago Bears. And him getting hired just shows how tone-deaf the management of the Bears is. When you have a young quarterback like Justin Fields who needs to have development and needs his untapped potential to really be worked on, what do? What do the Bears do? They go out there and they hire a defensive-minded head coach. I mean, it's completely effing moronic, the fact that the Bears bring in Justin Fields, a guy needs a development, and you hire a defensive mind. That's completely stupid. And I get it. You know, the Bears definitely went out of their comfort zone hiring Matt Nagy, and I think Matt Nagy, I'm probably still higher on Matt Nagy than I think a lot of people are. I don't think, Chicago falling apart was necessarily his fault. I mean, he got to the playoffs with Mitch Trubisky as his quarterback. I think Matt Nagy, people are a little too harsh on him. I'd much rather have Matt Nagy as my head coach than Matt Eberflus. So I don't get that one. I don't think he'll be there next year, especially if they get Caleb. I think you should clean house, try to find your next a young offensive mind. Learn from this Fields mistake. If you're going to draft a quarterback, don't make the same mistake and hire another defensive mind with your rookie quarterback, because it clearly is not a good recipe. 26 is Arthur Smith from Atlanta. He's a weird one again, because there's actually an argument to be made that he should keep his job because Atlanta's probably going to make the playoffs this year. Now, that's not saying much, being that it is by far the worst division in football, but he will make the playoffs this year. They will host a playoff game. There's some things that I like about him. Obviously, in his past resume, completely resurrected the career of Ryan Tannehill back when he was the OC in Tennessee. But as a head coach in Atlanta, very rocky and just doesn't have much to show for it. I would probably move on from Arthur Smith. Although, I kind of get the argument for keeping him, because look at the quarterbacks he's had in Atlanta. A 55-year-old Matt Ryan and Desmond Ridder, who probably isn't a long-term NFL starter. I think it's safe to say now. And then 25, this is the last guy in the category, is Ron Rivera from the Commanders. I would actually put money on this. I'd be shocked if Ron Rivera came back to coach the Commanders next year. Not that he's the worst coach in the world or anything, but I think he's just outdated in today's NFL. I think Ron Rivera would be an incredible defensive coordinator. I think that, Ron Rivera's made a lot of money. He's been a head coach for a lot of years in the NFL. He's made a lot of money. If I'm him, I would pull the Dan Quinn thing and just go to a really good team and be a defensive coordinator. Imagine him as the Niners defensive coordinator, or one of the elite teams, him as the DC. I think that's the right career path for Ron Rivera. He's just not he's outdated in terms of being a head coach in the NFL. So that moves us into our next category, which is, I wrote down flawed, but there is one thing redeeming about these guys. There is one thing you can find. So starting at 24 is Todd Bowles. Now, people forget how good Todd Bowles was as the defensive coordinator with Tampa. It's the reason why he got this job. Brady and Arians, they were obviously great throughout the playoff run, but the specific Super Bowl game against Kansas City, that was Todd Bowles' defense that won them that game. I think I can't remember the score off the top of my head, but the defense was incredible in that game, and that's the reason why they won. That was Todd Bowles. Give him a lot of credit for that. But as a head coach, I would probably move off of Todd Bowles. Again, like I said, I have kind of an offensive bias, but really, really strong defensive mind. 23, kind of in the same boat. Like I just said, strong defensive mind. Robert Saleh, and we just talked about him in last night's podcast. I used to be really, really a staunch defender of Robert Saleh. Midway through this year, I saw key performances from his defense that for me was okay, I'm good with bringing him back. You can't really knock him for how bad the offense is because, Aaron Rodgers goes down on the first drive. They already admitted with bringing in Aaron that they don't trust Zach Wilson. They don't like Zach Wilson. So it's not really their fault that they were kind of forced into throwing Zach Wilson back out there. But the way he's managed the quarterback situation has been a complete disaster, and that is actually made me lose some of my respect for Robert Saleh, because he's just kind of like fledgling right now. This is kind of a mess, what he's doing with the quarterback situation. To realistically play Tim Boyle over Zach Wilson makes zero sense, you know. And at the time, I got benching Zach Wilson, but after watching Tim Boyle play, probably the worst play I've ever seen a quarterback ever do, whether it's college, whether it's the NFL. Tim Boyle throwing the 100-yard pick six to, what was that, Holland, I think it was? I can't remember, but it was that Black Friday game against Miami. On the 50-yard line, he can't even throw it into the end zone, and leads to a 100-yard pick six. That was the worst quarterback play I've ever seen in my life. So that was really bad for Robert Saleh. I still think he's a really good defensive mind, but there's clearly something off with the Jets. And Nate Hackett, Nathaniel Hackett. I get he's Aaron Rodgers' buddy, but he clearly is just awful. And he's a big reason why the Jets haven't looked very good either. But I think Robert Saleh just squeaks by and stays on as the head coach for next year, just because that excuse that Aaron, was gone this year. 22 is Mike McCarthy. Some people might think Mike McCarthy should be higher, but he's definitely, moved up for me this year. He's definitely impressed me this year because Dak Prescott, I've given Dak a lot of crap over the years. I've bashed on Dak. And this year, I've been one of the biggest staunch guys pushing back on Dak's MVP candidacy. But I can't deny Dak's having the best year of his career. And it's the year where Mike McCarthy takes over as the play caller. And I do think that is... that does mean something, because Kellen Moore was praised as this great offensive coordinator. But then Mike McCarthy comes in and it starts calling plays, and Dak has his best year. However... Mike McCarthy's still flawed. I think he's one of the worst head coaches in terms of clock management and just situationally knowing, time management, all that. I think he's terrible. Go back to, they've had a ton of mishaps with clock management, especially in that, I think it was 2021, the playoff game against the Niners in Dallas. They lost the game because of that. So there's some good stuff for Mike, but overall, I just think he's a flawed coach. And then 21 is probably going to be one of the more controversial ones. I think this is the hardest guy on the list to rank. Bill Belichick. Genius defensive mind, of course. But being a genius defensive mind doesn't mean you should be a head coach, especially in like I said, the current climate of the NFL. Bill Belichick realistically should be a defensive coordinator. He's not going to do that because his pride. He's been a head coach for however many years now, decades now. He has the Super Bowl rings as a head coach. So just from an ego and a pride standpoint, Bill Belichick will never be a defensive coordinator. But in today's league, realistically, that's the job Bill Belichick should have, is a defensive coordinator. He'd be the best in the league at it, but that's not what he's going to do. And he is extremely flawed, because as a head coach, you have to be able, even if, you're really good at one side of the ball, you also have to manage the other side of the ball as well, because you are the head coach of the team. You're not the coach of the defense. You're the head coach of the Patriots. And the offense the past 2 years, what is there to say? Dreadful. I don't even know what to say. And I know a lot about watching bad offenses, being a Steelers fan, but even this team finds a way to be worse, It's bad. So Bill, I talked about it last night. I think it's interesting to see where Belichick will end up next year, because I think it's like a 5% chance he's the Patriots head coach. I think the crafts are done, especially if they're going to draft, because I think they hold, in the draft standings right now, they're number 2. So they're going to draft a quarterback. And if I'm the Patriots, I'm just cleaning house and starting over with my new franchise quarterback, and I want to go out there and find a young offensive mind. Bill, we love you, but it's over. It's been over ever since Brady left. So I'm interested to see where Bill goes. Our next category, I put promising. These are promising head coaches at 20. We have Kevin Stefanski. I know he's been the coach there for a while, but I give Stefanski a lot of credit for being, the first head coach to lead the Browns to their playoff win in their franchise history. Ever since The Browns came back to Cleveland. I think 99, I think, was their first year. I could be wrong about that, but I'm not so good with NFL history. I'm really good with NBA history, but NFL history is very, very foggy to me. So I'm pretty sure the Cleveland Browns came back in 99 to Cleveland, and they had not won a playoff game since 2020. Under, Stefanski's first year, they beat my Steelers in a dreadful game in Pittsburgh. I watched it. So I give him a lot of credit for that, and it's not really his fault that the management and the owner of the Browns forced on this Deshaun Watson trade. And he's done the best he could with this. I think his job should be safe. The fact that they are currently holding a wild card spot despite, all the controversy that's gone on and Deshaun just not really playing many games. I still think Stefanski's really good. So I leave him in the promising tier. 19 is Shane Steichen. Who I think actually has an argument for Coach of the Year this year. Because, again, he has the Colts in a wild card spot. And you think of how dreadfully bad the Colts were last year. The Colts were a complete and unmitigated disaster. What did they pick? Like 4th or 5th overall? You got to be really, really bad to be that low in the draft. Shane Steichen comes in. They're sitting at 7-5. I would have never believed that. And he had Anthony Richardson looking really good. In the little window we got of Anthony Richardson, he looked great. And also Shane Steichen, we know that he's credited with the development of Jalen Hurts. He was the offensive coordinator for the Eagles that were in the Super Bowl last year. So I think this guy in the future will probably be a top 10 head coach in the NFL. And then speaking of that as well, DeMeco Ryans at 18, another stud, first-time head coach this year along with Steichen. Another guy I think you can argue should be coach of the year. Because Houston, as much as we just said the Colts were a dumpster fire, Houston's been a mess for years now. The Deshaun thing blows up. They're just not a good team, and he comes in, and they're a viable playoff team. I know that Stroud obviously plays a large part in that, but DeMeco, that defense is really, really good under DeMeco Ryans. Again, another guy that I think could end up being a top 10 head coach in the NFL. And then our last guy in this category at 17 is Zach Taylor. I don't know where to fall on Zach Taylor. I think he's above average. I think he's good. But, he had that Bengals job. I want to say he had it a year before Burrow was there. And granted, the team wasn't very good, but they were really, really bad before they got Burrow. There's a reason why they had the number 1 overall pick and the right to draft Burrow. They've been great with Burrow, but it's kind of hard for me to evaluate how good of a head coach you are whenever you have a top 2 quarterback in Joe Burrow. So I don't know about Zach Taylor. I could be underrating him because he's been to a Super Bowl, but it's just hard for me to really gauge what Zach Taylor brings to the table. But I would say he's good. He is a good head coach. Our next category, I just put the word stability. You might have some down years, but overall, if this guy's your head coach, you're not going to have much chaos in the building, and you're going to have a stable, good team most years. 16 is Sean McDermott. Another guy that earlier in the year I was I could kind of see him losing his job because the Bills, they went into this year, even though I said in the offseason, the Bills, I saw cracks in the foundation. But still, to be 6-6 with the amount of talent you have on this Bills roster is an extreme disappointment. If I'm the Bills, I would much rather have an offensive mind to really tap into Josh Allen and get everything you can out of Josh Allen. Because there are given Sundays where Josh Allen looks like the most talented player in the NFL. It's just not consistent because he doesn't have that offensive mind mentoring him. He had it for a couple years with Brian Dable. When he had Brian Dable, you had some people actually took Josh Allen over Patrick Mahomes. I remember having those debates, I had my friend Jake on the podcast in episode 2. I used to argue with him about who the best quarterback in the NFL was. I still had Mahomes. He would argue to me that it was Josh Allen. We were having those conversations about Josh Allen whenever he had Dable. But since Dable left, it's been kind of disappointing. And for me, I think you can make a case that if you get rid of McDermott and bring in an offensive mind, it would be better for the Bills. But they're not going to do that because Sean McDermott provides stability. I give him a lot of credit for building up the Bills. They were a disaster for a decade. And I used the Mark Jackson comparison with the Warriors. If you're familiar with that situation, Mark Jackson, came into the Warriors. The Warriors were a disaster for like a decade. And then Mark Jackson comes in, fixes it up, and helps develop Steph Curry. But whenever the Warriors were ready to win championships, they got rid of Mark Jackson. They brought in a win-now guy and Steve Kerr, and they won 4 championships. I feel like this is kind of like that situation where Sean McDermott is really good at building up your culture, building up your team, but when it's time to really start winning, I don't know, he's missing something. So I like him. He's good. I just don't think he fits right now what the Bills need. But he's very stable, so I leave him at 16. 15 is Sean Payton. Some people might have Sean Payton in their top 10, not me. I think Sean Payton is extremely overrated. You look at his tenure with the Saints. Again, we're trying to just take into account this year, but I have to bring up the Saints stuff because that every time I get in an argument with people over Sean Payton, they bring up his Saints stuff, so I have to talk about it. Sean Payton from 2018, 2019, 2020 had a top 5 roster in the NFL and has nothing to show for it. You can cry about that PI against the Rams all you want, but that team was loaded and just had nothing to show for it. Everyone likes to bring up his Super Bowl ring. His Super Bowl ring was back in, 2009. The NFL is like the complete makeup and landscape of the NFL. It's a night and day from what it was in 2009. It's a completely different game from what it was in 2009. That ring holds very little value for me personally, but he's a good head coach. I just hate it whenever people say he's like a GOAT or a top 5 head coach. That drives me insane because he had some of the most stacked rosters. Like I could have coached some of those Saints teams with how much talent they had. Drew Brees, a Hall of Fame quarterback. Okay, so he's good. He brings stability, but he's not a top 5 all-time great guy. And I will give him credit. He definitely has helped resurrect Russell Wilson's career because last year Russell Wilson looked completely washed, and now Russell Wilson looks like a good, viable quarterback. So I give him credit where it's due, but stop with the he's a GOAT. That's complete and utter BS. 14 is Matt LaFleur. I feel like Matt LaFleur is really underrated around the league. I know he doesn't have the ring, but you look back at the Packers before he got there, and back whenever it was still Mike McCarthy as the head coach, the Packers were bad. Like 2018, they missed the playoffs. And then LaFleur gets there, and they become an offensive juggernaut. You know, him and Aaron really clicked. Big reason why Aaron Rodgers was the back-to-back MVP is because he was in LaFleur's offense. You know, I don't think Rodgers wins those back-to-back MVPs if Mike McCarthy's the play caller. So give him a lot of credit. And he's done a great job with Jordan Love this year, 6-6. You know, just comparing them to their in-division rival, the Bears. Like, look what happens whenever you give your young quarterback an offensive mind. You know, the Bears, they get their young quarterback in Fields. What do? They hire a defensive mind. Well, yeah, no shit, it's not going to work out. You know, you need someone who Fields can bounce stuff off of and relate to and mentor. Be mentored by, And then the Packers, you're seeing Jordan Love. Like, Jordan Love now looks like a really good quarterback in the NFL. Just beat the Chiefs in prime time. So Matt LaFleur, I give him a lot of credit. 13 is Mike Vrabel. I know the Titans aren't good this year, but in years past, Mike Vrabel, I think there's been times where he's been, one of the best coaches in the league because you just look at the talent that the Titans have had. It's not that great. It's not like I wouldn't say they've never really had an elite roster, but they've been an AFC powerhouse ever since Mike Vrabel got there. They won that division a bunch of times since he's taken over. They were the 1 seed in 2021. Now, I thought they were a bit of fool's gold. I didn't trust Tannehill, and that turned out to be correct because he flamed out against the Bengals that year in the playoffs. But Vrabel is really good at just coaching guys up and taking not very talented teams and making them really good. I know, again, they're not that good this year, but they're playing a rookie quarterback. What do you want? 12 is Kevin O'Connell. Really good young offensive mind. Made the playoffs last year with the Vikings, and I think this year's is even more impressive with what he's done with even when Kirk Cousins was playing. They were missing Justin Jefferson, the most dynamic receiver in the NFL. To not have him there, and their offense didn't skip a beat. Kirk Cousins was having the best year of his career in Kevin O'Connell's system, and then Kirk goes down, looks like the Vikings season is done, and then he brings in Josh Dobbs, and Josh Dobbs had a really, really bad game against the Bears. But overall, I think that he's really O'Connell has overachieved with this roster. Has them as a viable wild card spot. I think is extremely impressive because you look at how dreadfully bad their defense is, and the fact that they're still vying for a wild card spot shows his impact on the offensive side of the ball. Number 11, John Harbaugh for the Ravens. I give John Harbaugh a lot of credit for his development of Lamar Jackson because you got to remember, back when Lamar Jackson was drafted, he was not viewed as like an elite level quarterback. He was looked at as a very raw prospect. A lot of people said he should maybe play a different position than quarterback. So I give John Harbaugh deserves a lot of credit for figuring out how to perfectly use Lamar Jackson. So that duo is like a match made in heaven because Harbaugh embraced Lamar and he built the offense to fit Lamar's needs and helped him, Lamar win an MVP. And the Ravens, they're just always good. They're always a good football team when John Harbaugh's there. They always have a really good defense. This year, their defense is really, really good. I think he just provides the stability. And then just sticking in division, my coach, number 10, Mike Tomlin. I think Mike Tomlin, again, is a really hard one for me to rank personally because he's my team's head coach. So I have a lot of mixed feelings on Mike Tomlin. And I hear everything under the sun. Living in Pittsburgh, I hear every sort of different take you could hear on Mike Tomlin. I hear people that love him and praise him. I hear people that completely despise Mike Tomlin and want him fired. I kind of fall somewhere in the middle of the spectrum here. I see the good qualities of Mike Tomlin, and I see the bad side of him. And the bad side is that Mike Tomlin really struggles with accountability in his organization. Especially he's not good at picking coordinators at all. I've talked about Matt Canada this whole year. The fact that Matt Canada lasted as long as he did is a complete embarrassment. And we'll probably have to make a separate video just about Mike, but the good side of him is stability. He's never had a losing season. And I know a lot of Yinzers like to just throw that under the bus because we've had a lot of talent on this team, but say we will, that is a really, really hard stat to pull off. Winning, never having a losing year, I get it. It is kind of embracing mediocrity because ultimately the goal is to get to the Super Bowl. And we haven't been to the Super Bowl in over a decade, so I get that. But he does bring the stability, and that's why he's up here. Because, I think it's a luxury as Steeler fans that we get to complain that we're not competing for Super Bowls because there are 10 other teams in the NFL that would kill to be in the position we've been in, where we're just a steady, good playoff, steady level playoff team. I don't know if any of that made sense, but that's kind of my take on Tomlin is he brings the stability, and a lot of other fan bases would like to have what we've had as Steeler fans. We are spoiled. But next category is I put something special. There is one thing that these coaches do that's really, really good. Number 9, we have Nick Sirianni, who's not particularly my cup of tea, but he was in the Super Bowl last year. And I said this is a make-or-break year for Nick Sirianni going into this year because whenever he turned the play-calling duties over to Shane Steichen, that's when the Eagles looked at their best. Obviously, they lost Steichen. He takes the Colts job this offseason. So I was like, okay, well, now that Sirianni's back to being the play caller, it's going to be all on him if they suck. But they're 10-2. They're right back to where they were last year. So, again, when they hired him, I didn't really particularly care for the hire, but you can't deny the impact he's had on this team. They went to a Super Bowl. They're probably going to be back in the Super Bowl this year. And he does bring that fiery attitude. Again, not my particularly cup of tea, but the players tend to love it. And that's ultimately that's what matters, is what are the players going to listen to. And they seem to really like his attitude. Number 8 is Brian Dable. Brian Dable, obviously, the Giants are a mess this year, and I kind of saw this coming in the fact that they gave Daniel Jones a lot of money. I was arguing with Giants fans this offseason about the Saquon thing. We talked a lot about the Saquon mess, about how he was going to hold out and all that. I had Giants fans telling me that I was a casual because I didn't watch Giants games, and Daniel Jones was actually really good. Well, I hate to be I told you so, but look at how bad Daniel Jones was this season. I don't have the stats pulled up, but I remember There was a point in the year where his TD interception ratio was like 1-7. It was really, really bad. So I'm not putting that on Brian Dable. The fact that he got Daniel Jones a $40 million annual contract, I think speaks enough for how good of a head coach he is. The Giants, I just think they got the management of the Giants, I think, just got way too ahead of themselves. They should have franchise tagged Daniel Jones this season. And now they would know they wouldn't have that awful contract on the books. Because even if you go out there and draft a quarterback this year, which they're probably going to do, you still have Daniel Jones' contract on the books. And no one's taking that. Nobody in the NFL will take Daniel Jones' contract. So we'll see. Again, probably another team we should make another video about. But Brian Dable, I think, is an incredible offensive mind. And going back to what we talked about with the Bills, like, he's a large part of why Josh Allen was looking like the best quarterback in the NFL. You know, Josh Allen never looked better than whenever he had Brian Dable. Number 7, Dan Campbell. I think Dan Campbell is going to win Coach of the Year this year. Now, from an X's and O's standpoint, I always say this, but I say it because it's true. From an X's and O's standpoint, Dan Campbell isn't the best, and we don't really know because he's not calling plays. But from a motivational standpoint, second to none in the NFL. His guys want to run through a brick wall for him because he brings that passion. He just has the charisma to be an NFL head coach. Like I said about Nick Sirianni, about how this was his make or break year. Well, next year is going to be Dan Campbell's make or break year because he's going to lose his really good young offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson, the OC for the Lions, he will be a head coach next year. I don't know where, but mark my words, bet money on that, he will be. So it's going to be up to Campbell to A, either call the plays himself, or B, go out there and find another guy to replace Johnson. So next year is going to be big for Dan Campbell, but you can't deny this year the Lions are having their best season in decades. You know, John F. Kennedy was president the last time the Lions were this good. Think about that. Dan Campbell, he's really good. Number 6 is Doug Peterson. One of two guys to say they have beaten Bill Belichick in a Super Bowl. I think Doug Peterson is extremely underrated. I think he brings a lot of stability and is a really clever offensive mind. And really, really cleaned up Jacksonville. Because you look at the disaster Jacksonville was with Urban Meyer and how bad that could not only destroy your quarterback's just mentality and all that, but just the trajectory of this franchise could have been destroyed by Urban Meyer. But then you hire a real NFL mind in Doug Peterson, cleans it up, and they go to the playoffs just a year later. Think of how bad the Jags were under Urban Meyer. You flip that with Peterson, just a year later, they win a playoff game. They have one of the most impressive playoff victories in the past decade, beating the Chargers. They were down, 24-0 at halftime? A lot of teams would probably just give up, but Doug Peterson was able to help lead that team to win that game. And they were in the game against the Chiefs in the second round as well. So I think Doug's really good, and he has the jewelry to prove it. Now we move into the top 5. This is the GOAT level coaches for me. 5 is Pete Carroll. I give Pete a lot of credit for the Russell Wilson trade moved off of Russ. I know Russ has looked better with Sean Payton, but overall, I'd say Seattle won that. And Pete Carroll did what Bill Belichick was not willing to do, and he kind of relinquished some power. He kind of acknowledged that, you know what, I should let the GM be the GM, and I shouldn't be doing all the draft decisions. And it's paid all kinds of dividends because the Seahawks, I think the past 2 drafts have had the best drafts out of any team in the NFL. And Pete Carroll, I give him a lot of credit for that because Bill hasn't done that. Bill will not relinquish his GM powers, and he's been like a disaster as the GM. So Pete, give him a lot of credit for that. He has a Super Bowl ring, was really instrumental in developing Russ, and made Geno Smith. Geno Smith has looked really good, as the Seattle Seahawks starter. Now, I don't think he's a franchise building stone guy. They're going to eventually have to find a guy to play that position, but Pete, he's a legend. What can I say? 4, this one might be weird for some people. I might have him too high, but Mike McDaniel, because he's only a second-year head coach, so the fact that I have him at 4 and in the GOAT tier, I just think Mike McDaniel is the perfect modern-day head coach. He is everything you want in a 2023 football head coach. offensive genius. That's what you want. Tua, this is as good as Tua could ever look. Tyreek Hill is going to shatter the 2,000-yard mark because of Mike McDaniel's system. Was tutored, and his mentor was Kyle Shanahan. Like, this guy just has a lot going for him, and the Dolphins are probably going to be the 1 seed this year in the AFC. So I get it if you want to argue like he just doesn't have enough experience, but I think he will go down as one of the better head coaches in the history of the NFL. And I really, really like him. I think, if in a vacuum, you're just like looking at starting a football team, that's a guy I would pick to be my head coach. That's the type of coach that I like, offensive-minded. Number 3, Sean McVay has a Super Bowl. The Rams were a juggernaut. People forget quickly how dominant the Rams teams were. Think of 2018. Think of 2019. They got to a Super Bowl. They were incredible that year. I know they didn't play very well in the Super Bowl. That was Bill Belichick at the peak of his powers, coaching the defense there. But Sean McVay, he's built just an offensive juggernaut there with the Rams, or they were at least, and got the Super Bowl ring eventually with Matthew Stafford back in 2021. I think he's a stud. I think he's one of the best offensive minds in the NFL. Kind of crazy just for how young he is, because he can still coach another 20, 30 years. Who knows how many rings he'll have if he does do that. But I think he's just an offensive genius. Again, similar to what I said about McDaniel, he's just the type of guy you want in today's modern era. Number 2, some people might get mad that I don't have him at 1. I have Andy Reid at 2. I get it. He has 2 Super Bowl rings. But similar to what I said about Zach Taylor, I think it's kind of hard to measure what your real coaching prowess is whenever you have an elite quarterback. And Patrick Mahomes is arguably the most talented player to ever put on football pads, ever. So whenever you have that guy, of course coaching matters, of course. But when you have Patrick Mahomes, and especially when Andy Reid, he had countless loaded teams and never won a Super Bowl before then. You look at his tenure in Philadelphia, had all kinds of stacked super teams, didn't get a Super Bowl there. He had plenty of years in Kansas City with good teams. I'll give him credit for revitalizing Alex Smith. He definitely did that. But I just don't think he's the best in the league right now. I think there's one mind that I would prefer. But if you take Andy Reid as number 1, like, I get it. He has the rings. He has the clout around the NFL. Most people consider him number 1. I think he's just a smidge overrated because he has Patrick Mahomes. Like, let's be honest, I could coach Patrick Mahomes. So that's just my one thing with Reid. I could be wrong on that, but that's just where I stand. Number 1 is Kyle Shanahan. I think he's the best coach in the NFL because look at the quarterback play that Kyle Shanahan has dealt with since he took over the Niners. He went to a freaking Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo is a backup level quarterback. He looked incredible with Shanahan. Took Jimmy Garoppolo to a Super Bowl. That's insane. And they've been a complete NFC juggernaut ever since he got there. Think of how laughably bad the Niners were before he took over. They were one of the worst teams in the league. He comes there. They've been a juggernaut. Like I said, I know that he doesn't have the jewelry to prove it, but I think this could be the year that he finally gets it done. Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant. Now he looks like prime Kurt Warner in Shanahan's system. Going back before he was a head coach, offensive coordinator with the Falcons, made Matt Ryan an MVP. Matt Ryan was a good quarterback, but nobody would have thought Matt Ryan would win an MVP in his career. He did it with Kyle Shanahan, and big part why Atlanta got to that Super Bowl, Kyle Shanahan's offense. So for me personally, I would prefer Shanahan over Reid. Like, in a vacuum, if I could just pick anyone to be my head coach, it would be Kyle Shanahan. I could be wrong on that, but that's what this is for. This is for conversation. I doubt anyone made it this far because why would you listen to me ramble like this for however long this video has been? But if you made it, I really, really do appreciate you listening to me ramble. Please leave your comments. I think I'm going to take flack for not having Andy at number 1, but that's what I want to hear from you guys. Let me know your thoughts on this. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe.